You're listening to Talking to Teens, where we speak with leading experts from a variety of disciplines about the art and science of parenting teenagers. I'm your host, Andy Earle. We're here today with David Sortino, the author of 2 books, and he has 2 new books coming out in the next 2 years. He's the author of The Promised Cookie, No Longer Angry Children, which is an incredible book about a school for challenged children that he went to work for when he was in his young 20s, and this incredible group of kids. And his second book, A Guide to How Your Child Learns, Understanding the Brain from Infancy to Young Adulthood, is a collection of articles that he wrote for the paper. They're all focused on a scientific finding and how it applies to raising kids of different ages. I should also note that Dr. Sortino holds a master's degree in human development from Harvard University and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Saybrook University. He spent 35 years as a teacher, a counselor, a director, and a resource specialist. And currently, he's the director of the National Feedback Institute in Grayton, California. David, thank you so much for making the time to be here today. I've now read 2 of your books here, The Promised Cookie and A Guide to How Your Children Learns. And I gotta say, we've spoken a few times now, and every time I talk to you, it's like I discover more crazy things about your life. There seems like there's just been so much packed in there, but all around, education and really educating kind of hard to reach students. And so I wonder just if you could talk a little bit about how that all started or what kicked you into this whole crazy mess of things.
Well, everybody has a story. And I tell that to my students and my clients that everybody has a novel, believe it or not. And for me, it came out with The Promised Cookie because it's something that I held within myself for years. And it actually affected a lot of my ability to learning potential, because I was always questioning, am I up to snuff, so to speak? But the interesting thing is, in third grade, what had happened was that I spent half the year out in the hallway for behavioral problems, and no one knew why this suddenly happened. Because kindergarten, first, second grade, I was fine. All of a sudden, third grade, something happened. Well, what had happened was my grandfather passed away, and in Italian families, it's an open casket. So for the first time in my life, I saw not only a person who was deceased, but it was someone who I knew.
Yeah.
After that, a couple of months later, my father, who had a fairly good job, he was like a CPA in a large corporation, they had suggested that he move to Los Angeles and take over this large company. And so he was flying out often, let's say once a month, and he had a couple of emergency landings. And I started having nightmares, and that carried over into third grade. And eventually, they sent me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, "Well, what's going on? You've been fine up until this time," because I was having nightmares or whatever. And come to find out, years later, I realized that I was sort of unconsciously trying to keep my father from flying because I was afraid he was going to die.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And I came from a family that was very academic. I have cousins. The boys became MDs and the women became teachers. But when I say MDs, we're talking about, there's one that's world famous. He discovered the AIDS virus, he grew up next to me, and I grew up with him. He's 10 years older. His name is Dr. Robert Gallo. He discovered the AIDS virus. He discovered the leukemia virus. I'm just saying that the pressure to succeed in school was dramatic, and so I started acting out. Yeah.
Right,
and so what happened was, after seeing the psychiatrist, who reminded me of my grandfather, actually, I was fine. But I always carry that year with me throughout. So I got eventually, what had happened was that in Promised Cookie, my first major job with children who had behavioral problems, who had been sexually, physically abused or whatever, from the Promised Cookie, I felt when I walked on campus, I felt that I was in these kids' bodies because I'd been there. So a lot of the things that I did was intuitive with these kids because I felt that in order to reach kids who have issues such as sexual abuse or whatever, they're very kinesthetic. These are kids who do not like to be touched. So I figured by doing something kinesthetic, which is what I needed, but they forced me to sit at my desk, I ended up developing an academic program like the Promise Cookie where I tried to incorporate a kinesthetic type of program with kids who had been physically abused, very much like Montessori. Montessori had orphan kids who she worked with, and she did a lot of stuff that had to do with the kinesthetic parts of her brain because that's a part of the of kids' brains that it had not been touched. So basically, that was a major turning point for me. And from then on, I've always went in and did residential treatment, juvenile hall, stuff that was always with kids who had behavioral issues. And for me, the connection was that I understood what these kids were going through.
So that was before you had studied all of developmental psychology and had become Dr. Sortino. Like this was just...
Well, don't forget though, and as an undergraduate, I got a degree in psychology, but I was always interested in the brain. I got to be in psychology or whatever, but I was always interested in some aspect because I was like trying to figure out my own particular problems. And until I walked onto that campus in the Promise Cookie, I didn't really make that connection of how important it was for me kinesthetically to be able to express my stuff. And because it was the 50s, so they sat me in a desk all day and I was losing my mind, saying, I can't do this. And then after that, I went to graduate school. I worked with Kohlberg at Harvard and, stuff like that. And then I taught graduate school in the Bay Area, and I taught child development. And then I got a PhD in clinical psychology, But I was always interested in the brain. And a lot of that is my own particular need to nurture myself and to have a better understanding of kids. And then now for 5 years, I've done I'm into, the neuroscience. I do neurofeedback on children who've been, abused, et cetera. So, and that's been successful. So that's where we're at.
That explains there's a neurofeedback essay in A Guide to How Your Child Learns.
Exactly.
Okay, but I got to say, this book, The Promise Cookie, is incredible. And it's like, you said you wrote it when you were 24 years old. It was not what I was expecting. I mean, there's like a love story in here. There's these like vivid characters. It reads almost like a novel. It's like beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Again, like I said before, everyone has something that they need to express, whether it's through painting, art, physicality, through dance or whatever. And I think that's what I did with the children. The program was called Rescue, and I call it Cope. But you have to, when people are repressing something, it has to come out physically. And unfortunately, you get to talk therapy or whatever. That doesn't hack it for about 99% of the people, particularly kids. They need to be able to express stuff with their body. So, sorry I got off on a tangent.
No, but I think that's such a theme of the book. And like, there's a story in here where you take a break from school and you're like spending 10 days in Jamaica and you can't even escape it. There's like a dad there who, recruits you to come talk to his 15-year-old son. And he's like, oh, you got to talk to my kid. He's, so lazy.
That was very heavy.
Right.
Because I meet with the kid. The father's a Yaley, architect, very famous guy on the island, building all this stuff. He has no clue about who this kid is, and I go into his bedroom and he's got, Jimi Hendrix, on the walls and stuff. And I said, look, I really understand what you're going through. And I said, just believe in yourself and try and get through this period and he was a musician, wanted to be a musician. The father wanted him to go to Yale, that type of stuff. And I said, go with where your heart is and stay with your music and everything will be fine. And, it was cool. I forgot all about that. That's really amazing that I carry, I was in Jamaica and this guy Sort of, I want you to meet my son. He's really screwed up. The kid was phenomenal.
But it's an instinct. It's like we are looking for what's wrong in our kids and so that we can fix it. But a lot of times, there's nothing wrong. Or if you were in that situation, you'd behave in exactly the same way. And it just has to do with the environment that they're in, right? And it's like you're saying that we all have something that, needs to come out that we need to express. And that's why I brought that up, because it was like what you did with the kid in however many minutes you sat down with him was just like, say, hey, you need to tell your dad about how passionate you are about music, and you need to convince him that you're serious about this and that, you want to go to music school and you want to do you got to go make this case to him. And it was like he had this thing that he was inside of him, but he just hadn't he didn't have the ability to, to communicate it yet because he's 15 years old.
And his father was so close.
Right.
That's the thing about adolescence, is that adolescence is that period where they are ready to break out. They are ready to be creative. And the parents repress out of fear, because the parents are repressing everything in their own life. And they won't let these kids break out because these parents are trapped, emotionally. And the thing is that they don't respect or trust that these kids are going to be safe and phenomenal and creative. And then what they do is they repress it. And then the kid ends up, getting into drugs or whatever it might be for them to escape the repression of their fathers or parents who never were able to get out of that hole,
Yeah. So there's a passage in your book that really stood out to me. There's a guy named Frank that kind of comes to work at the school, and he's like asking you, how am I ever going to teach these kids, these kids that are so troubled? And you ask him to think about his own past, and he remembers baseball and how important baseball was when he was a kid. And then it says, I said, take your knowledge of baseball or think back to your school days and find out how you would have wanted to be spoken to or taught. That's how you should teach these kids. Remember your own childhood. Remember the most vulnerable times. Get into that feeling, and maybe you'll be able to understand what it's like to be in our kids' shoes.
Oh, that's cool, because he's about, the only one who I still have a connection with him, because we played ball against each other in semi-pro baseball, and he became a professional dancer. Ballroom dancer, but what he's doing now? He's working he's a great teacher, a history teacher in New York City, and but he's a professional dancer. And the other one, the music guy who taught music to the kids.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember that chapter.
Oh yeah, I love that one as well.
He passed away, but he came from the same type neighborhood as Joe. His name was Frank, but his name was Joe. And I enlisted them because, they came from really, really difficult home environments. And George was the same way. Remember that he said to the kids, feel the music. Feel the music. The kid, whatever, Marty ends up, whoever her name is, ends up taking the guitar and breaking it against the
smashes
wall.
The guitar,
and George
right?
says, that's fantastic. This is bringing back a lot of stuff. But I enlisted my, friends who I knew thought like me.
Right. I just thought it was so cool that it was like what your instinct was to get them to look back at when they felt vulnerable, and then that place was where they could then connect with the kids, because the empathy, I think, is so important.
Oh, yeah. It was, they had to get in touch with their own, their own essence, so to speak. And that's what, baseball for George was music, and then Joe, of course, was a dancer, and he used to do, ballroom dance with these kids. But I don't think I wrote about that, but it was pretty cool. These two guys are just amazing, And George, unfortunately, passed away last year, and he was like a professional musician, and, but, we spent period of time together, it was cool. It was like playing baseball.
I'm just wondering, as a parent, how you try to find that vulnerability in yourself so that you can kind of connect with your own teenager in that same way.
I mean, just today, I just had a session with a kid. These parents are, very upperly mobile, educated, affluent. They own a winery, a high-end winery, and blah blah blah. And I told I told the parents, they're freaking out that you can't do this or that, which is really minor. And I said that not only do you have to trust, but you also the child, but you gotta. We're so overread. We have so much knowledge that they apply that, and they take away the kid's 6 or 7, and they take away his childhood because they try and make everything controlled and predictable, and kids have to fail. How else are you gonna? When I was a kid, we used to go up into the hills and spend the whole day there. No one ever worried about us getting abducted. We just went up into the,
Sure.
and played for hours like Tom Sawyer. And someone referred to my book that it was like Tom Sawyer. The kid's behavior or whatever. And, think of Tom Sawyer. We got to stop trying to control kids, their development, their emotional. And, this thing of no one can fail. It's unbelievable how much we're screwing the kids' brains up. They're like young children, and we're treating them like they're adolescents or young adults. There's no, we're losing their childhoods. It's unbelievable. But that's a big thing. I did a job. I spent a year up in Northern California, a residential program for sexually abused kids ages 5 to 12. I'm talking about 5-year-olds sexually abused, which meant that we would have to work with them, and they reunify and bring them. The courts would reunify them back to the homes, and they immediately get sexually abused, by an uncle or whatever. And what I did with them was to set up a program that was thematic in the sense that what it was, with sexually abused children, they're like adoptive, abandoned kids. And they sexually act out. It's amazing.
Yeah.
That's how they can relate to people because they've been sexually abused and they're so angry. And so what I did was that I go to the school as a director, and all the teachers are sort of doing their own thing. And people who get attracted to this population, they get overprotective. So they would do their own thing, all these teachers. And I said, this is nonsense. We got to incorporate everybody's talents into a thematic type of program academically to get everybody involved. And basically are all freaked out because they're afraid to let these kids interact with each other because they would, basically fight or sexually, act out sexually. And it was remarkable because after 5 or 6 weeks with these kids, I remember the first week I was there, I said to the teachers on Friday, we're going to do a barbecue. We're going to put all the tables out in the middle of the school grounds where the kids went to school, and we're going to have a barbecue. This teacher said, we can't do that because they're going to kill each other. They're not used, they can't socialize.
Yeah, set the bar high for them.
What I did was I put the tables out, we had the barbecue, and it was like these kids were like the most well-behaved kids you've ever seen. They were so happy, and the teachers all go, oh my God, this is amazing. They're acting like normal kids. Sometimes when you treat children in a normal way, they act normal. It was the teachers who were abnormal.
Yeah, it's like Dale Carnegie said, just give people a reputation to live up to. And if you expect good things from them, then you'll be amazed at what they do. But if you expect them to be terrible.
And I made the Friday barbecues not only a major thing, but kids had to achieve certain things physically, running or push-ups. When they achieved this particular thing at the barbecue, they would get a watch. I give them all a watch, and they had never got anything like. But the bottom line is, these kids, they just got normalized. But the problem was that they ended up reunifying and screwed them up again.
They had to go back, right?
Yeah, and for a year, this was the most amazing program. I had never written about it, but what I'm saying is that I normalized a situation, whereas all these teachers were acting out of fear, And, saying the glass is half empty, I was saying, go to the human being's highest self potential. It was phenomenal. It's like the promised cookie towards the end when things really came to. I've never had such, a really good feeling about how the human potential that can be achieved, even with the teachers. The teachers just became phenomenal,
Well, it strikes me too that that's the same thing. You gave them a reputation to live up to.
Yes, exactly. And everybody operates out of fear, Teachers, everybody, actually, I'm talking about the population that I deal with. That a lot of the adults who, work with these kids or whatever, they're so repressed that they operate out of fear that something wrong is going to happen to these kids. And in a sense, they hold back and the kids hold back. I did this at juvenile hall, the same thing. I worked 5 years at the hall, and I would go in and do moral development groups with them. And I would take juvenile offenders who were they had assaulted individuals, they were gangbangers, and whatever. And I would take maybe 4 at a time in their, the red uniforms, the jumpsuits or whatever.
Yeah.
To a place where it was a senior type of living place where they all lived, all the seniors, to hit golf balls. And so all these senior citizens were looking at these kids and they knew where they were from, jumpsuits.
Sure, right.
We would be hitting golf balls with them. It's fantastic. I just think about that because the kids were like, they loved it,
We're here with David Sortino, talking about his books, The Promised Cookie and A Guide to How Your Child Learns. And we're not done yet. Here's a look at what's coming up in the second half of the show.
Kids at the, bottom of the bell-shaped curve, they always end up being very unhappy, which is what I was really unhappy in middle school. So does that answer your question? Adolescence is like a very dangerous time of your life. You get through adolescence, you often live to be old age. Adolescence is, they're driving, they're doing pot, they're doing drugs and sex. This is like time bomb stuff. The brain wants to be smart. We don't want to no one wants to have a stupid brain.
Sure, yeah, we want to feel like we're moving forward in life.
Oh, yeah. It's like good food. Kids eat crap, but when you give them some type of good food, like they light up. They go, wow, this is pretty good. This is good. Go to the higher self parts of the brain, Kids who I tested for years at the juvenile hall were exhibiting the same things as these other kids. They were just not academic. I wrote an article on technical high schools, why we need a technical high school. They need technical high schools. These kids would be electricians and plumbers. This is what they want to do, and they'd be making more money than kids who go to college. In the state of Washington, 75% of adult offenders were spent time in juvenile hall. 75%. And the study was done in Washington. Think about that. Think about the money that they're spending to incarcerate, and it's all up front. They can go back to develop, school programs for these people to be successful.
Want to hear the full interview? Sign up for a subscription today. You get unlimited access to all the interviews I've conducted. It's completely affordable, and your subscription helps support the work we do here at Talking to Teens. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.